Hello and welcome to another edition of Pastor Brad's Corner, a place where you and I get to talk about some of the more difficult topics and subjects in the Bible and hopefully come to some understanding and get some clarity on them. This week's question comes from an anonymous user who asks, what does it mean to worship God in spirit and in truth? How do you worship in truth? And I'm sure that he's referring to the verse in John 4:24, which says, God is a spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. And it's a good question. What does it mean to worship in spirit? And what does it mean to worship in truth? Well, just to get some context here, in John chapter 4, we have the scene of Jesus and the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman at the well. And here Jesus was sitting at a place called Jacob's well. The Samaritan woman comes to fetch some water, and Christ begins a conversation with her. And he reveals himself to her as Christ, the Messiah, the true and living water, as he says. And amongst her questions, she says in verse 19, the woman said to him, Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. Essentially what she's talking about there is the Samaritan temple of Mount Gerizim. And if you're familiar with the culture of this time, you know that the Jews really hate the Samaritans. Both of these races really clash with each other. They hate each other. The Samaritans were the hated half-breed and seen as the lesser, inferior race by the Jews. And so for Christ to even be conversing with this woman was a very great surprise. And the conflict to which she's referring to, though, was the controversy between these two groups, the Jews and the Samaritans, of which location was the divinely ordered place of worship. Was it there on Mount Gerizim as the Samaritans held, or was it as the Jews held on the Temple Mount in the city of Jerusalem? The woman is really seeking an answer to this age-old question. But notice Christ's response in verse 21. He begins, Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is here, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. That's John 4:21 through 24. What Jesus is talking about here is his coming death, his crucifixion on the cross, which would summon and indeed inaugurate a new phase and a new age of worship in God's economy and for God's people. No longer would people have to travel to some far-off physical temple in one specific city to worship, but they'll be able to go to worship in every place. Regardless of where you are, you can worship God. And this is all because of what Jesus did for us on the cross. That's what Jesus is trying to emphasize here to this woman and indeed to all of us now, that we can worship God regardless of where we are in this world, where we are in this life. It says in Matthew 27:51, right after Jesus yielded up his spirit on the cross, that the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. This signifies the removal of separation, the breaking down of the barrier between God and his people. No longer are you required to go through some earthly middleman to get to God. No longer do you have to be summoned to some far-off temple to commune with God. No longer does God only reside in the Holy of Holies, in the innermost part of the temple. He dwells in you. His Holy Spirit has come inside of you at salvation. One of the greatest benefits of the cross was this breaking down of the barrier, this rending of the veil, therefore making it possible for all to worship God in spirit and in truth. And the importance of this phrase arises out of the glory of the cross. In spirit and truth means that our whole lives are an act of worship. Our entire existence, our entire life is to be our sacrifice for God. Not just the Christian things we do on Sundays. Everything we do in spirit and truth must be utterly and entirely soaked in the gospel and saturated in his grace. This means that you're not just worshiping when you go to church on Sundays. This means that you can worship God when you sit down to eat with your family, when you play basketball with your friends, when you go on a date with your loved one, when you're taking that dreaded math exam, when you're sipping coffee with a friend, when you're texting that special someone. Whatever you're doing, you're worshiping God. Do it all to the glory of God, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10:31. The great reformer John Calvin says, "There is no part of our life and no action so minute that it ought not to be directed to the glory of God, and that we must take care that, even in eating and drinking, we may aim at the advancement of it." And as A.W. Tozer says, living itself is to be our sacrament, our sacrifice, and the whole world our sanctuary. Christianity then, being a Christian, therefore, isn't something that you necessarily do. It's who you are. It's something you live. Our lives are to be the living embodiment of grace, the living reflection of Jesus. Our sole mission here on this earth is to be reflecting, improving, and living the gospel in every area of our lives, and displaying its incredible power to transform life. And we do that because of the cross. There, on the cross, Jesus sacrificed everything for us. There, Jesus paid it all, as the hymn says. Therefore, all to him I owe. That's what this verse means. Our whole lives are to be a sacrifice, a living sacrifice given only to Christ in his gospel. As Romans 12:1 says, "I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship." That's our worship, sacrificing our lives for the sake of the gospel. Well, thanks for watching. I trust this little video has been a help to you. If you have further questions about this topic or any other topic, be sure to hit the Ask button on the Walk the Same homepage. And remember to use the hashtag pastorbradscorner. Again, thanks so much for your support, and thanks for watching. See you next week.